on the streets. Let's speak to Habib Batta. He's an investigative journalist and blogger at Beirut Report. He's joining us from Beirut. So the Prime Minister is blaming his coalition partners on not being able to enact any reforms and is now requesting 72 hours for talks to judge whether there'll be more forthcoming on these reforms. Does it sound like he's just buying time? And what impact is that going to have on what we're seeing happen on the streets and the protesters?
Yeah, I mean, he's pretty much putting the ball in someone else's court, in which we see a lot in Lebanon, as politicians always blame somebody else. So now he's blaming his rivals for failing to implement his reform plan that will apparently save the country money and create all these jobs. And people don't actually, believe that, and people want some actually concrete steps. So he hasn't really announced anything new at all in this speech. He could have used this time to offer something to the protesters, but he's offered absolutely nothing, and he's just offered more blame game. So 72 more hours. What can happen? Lebanon's been in this mess for decades. So will 72 hours make a difference? Some say he's just kind of setting the stage for potential resignation. He said he'll address the nation again after the 72 hours. So what will happen then? We have to wait and see. But will people in the street actually react to this? They're out in the streets. They haven't moved. They're only growing in number.
And put this into context for us, because would it be correct to say, Habib, that they were really sparked, these protests at least, were sparked by the introduction of a list of new taxes, but these protests and these grievances go much further back, and many of the grievances, in fact, are pointed at politicians like Hariri, like the foreign minister, who the protesters accuse of corruption and mismanagement.
Yes, I mean, definitely there are so many problems in Lebanon. The telecom is an outrage in Lebanon. It's robbery. It's one of the most expensive phone rates in the world. So people had this last thing, which is they could speak to each other. People said that WhatsApp was the only thing working in Lebanon. So, that's why people have kind of let this boil over, I think, with an invasion of their personal space, their most personal communication. But beyond that, we have the garbage crisis. We have a healthcare crisis. We have a lot of cancer cases from the polluted rivers in Lebanon because of this trash crisis. We have people without jobs, unemployment is at an all-time high. People are worried about their money in the bank. So there's really a shopping list full of demands and problems in Lebanon, and he really didn't address any specifically. He just said, we're going to work together and make this work, and it's their fault, it's not my fault. So I imagine it's going to actually cause more anger, because people don't want just his resignation. They want a whole new system. They want new leaders. They want people who can actually fix problems in Lebanon instead of giving out contracts to their associates and friends, which is the way that the modus operandi of Lebanon is just constantly giving out contracts to cronies that never get completed. Infrastructure never gets completed. So people are really at a desperate state today. And the anger I've seen in the streets is not matched by the tone of the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister wasn't reacting to that really guttural, visceral anger people have. And I think if he doesn't address that, then there'll be more of this protest going on. It seems to be indefinite at this point.
And what do you make of that call? Right. And seeing as there are a number of crises, as you point out, what do you make of the call by the protesters for the Prime Minister to resign, as well as the government to resign? A government that's less than a year old. Is that a realistic demand at this point?
Well, I mean, I think you have to ask yourself, is there anything to replace these people? Is there any alternative system in Lebanon? There are plenty of people with ideas, but they're not organized. They have to have elections to get into power. We've just had elections, and people have just voted for these leaders again. It wasn't a huge turnout, but at the end of the day, these leaders do represent people in Lebanon. Whether they're angry at them or not is a separate story. I think people are angry. They want things to change, but to replace all the leadership, we've just had elections recently. So, Lebanon is a very difficult situation. These political parties, these political machines have been in power for so long. They have such great election machines and infrastructure of getting into power and patronage networks that these things can't be undone easily. These people, they have hospitals, they have schools, they provide basic public services to people. There are a lot of diehard supporters that even I think there might be anger in the streets tonight, but in the weeks ahead, people will probably eventually return to the way that things have worked in Lebanon, is kind of begging for crumbs from these leaders. So I don't really see an alternative system at this point to replace what's happening. And, we've seen this throughout the Middle East today. We've seen, corrupt systems being torn down, but vacuums of power resulting. So Lebanese are probably watching this. Probably some are excited right now, but in the days to come, they might be more fearful that there could be more chaos. There have been 3 people that have been killed. There have been bodyguards shooting at people from politicians. So it's really uncharted territory right now in Lebanon.
Okay, Habib Batta, we'll leave it there. Thank you for joining us on Al Jazeera. The Turkish